You want to talk about the movie Inception? Just saw it last night, and you just saw it?
I saw it today, yeah, with my family.
Right.
And I thought that it felt so familiar that I had the audacity to think that those ideas were plagiarized from our work, our Islamic work that we've been lecturing on for a couple of decades now.
A fly on the wall?
Uh-huh.
Perhaps a fly on the wall?
Well, yeah, possibly
So
a fly on the wall plagiarizing our ideas. Now, as preposterous as that may sound, I can explain. I started this work about 21, 22 years ago, 1989, thereabouts, where after actually building up an earlier material that is available to most people in the West or anywhere for that matter, people can access books and material on esoteric and erudite issues, and conspiracy theories and mysteries and history and politics and so on and so on, and theology and religion. But in 1989, all of that came to a head when I rediscovered my Islamic religion, so to speak, and started delving in the material that has been pretty much that had lain pretty much unread or undiscovered by Muslims for, well, except for a few books here and there over the centuries, pretty much since the time of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. Let me explain that more carefully. People read the material, but they had forgotten the original meaning of the material. And I'm speaking specifically of the material concerning the Dajjal, the personality, the person, the character of the Dajjal, as the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, warned against him in many of his statements. Now, in our talk right now, I'm not going to narrate the statements of the Prophet peace be upon him verbatim. I'll trust that hopefully someone else editing this material might add this hadith from the references we make to them, and also verses of the Quran that we might refer to in this conversation. But in 1989, let me start with one specific hadith, and it's not the only one that inspired all of this material, all of this work, which finds echoes of itself in this movie Inception. One of these hadiths is the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, warned. He said that when the Dajjal, this which translates loosely as the deceiver, or the grave deceiver, the great deceiver, or the greatest deceiver, when this man does his work, when the deceiver appears, he will come to a man, a person, and who is supposedly a believer, a believer in God, in Allah Almighty, the Creator. By the end of the conversation of the Dajjal, the deceiver's conversation with this believer, which could take 5-10 minutes, 15-minute conversation, that man will have turned into an ingrate, which is the word translates for the Arabic word kafir, loosely translated using Christian terminology as disbeliever or infidel. But that's not really the translation. Kafir in Arabic literally means ingrate.
Ingrate.
Now the reason that is so is actually because it's the perfect terminology. Infidel requires that you peer into somebody's heart, because infidel is in fide. Fide is Latin for faith, means without faith. Faith resides in the heart. You cannot tell if someone has faith or not unless you go into their heart. And Islam, of course, Islamic terminology is designed to be practical, to be pragmatic, more importantly, to be consistent. And this is the reason, in fact, that very term, the very definition of the term that distinguishes those who believe from those who don't, in this case the word kafir, is the reason why there have been no inquisitions in Islam. While Christianity and Judaism, well, especially Christianity and Hinduism and Buddhism, have always been plagued, that all these pagan religions have been plagued with inquisitions and witch hunts and persecutions. The reason, of course, is because when you define the opposite, the other, as an unbeliever, how do you... I mean, you might as well have called them... You might as well have said that that there's an invisible hat on their head. That we can tell those on our side with those who are not on our side because they're wearing an invisible hat on their head. You can't tell.
Belief is something in the heart.
Belief is in the heart. So basically, you can just imagine things. In the case of the witch, or the witches, for example, Salem witch hunts or European witch hunts. That case subsequent, for example, to the infamous or famous book Malus Maleficarum. Subsequent to that book, I don't know how many hundreds of thousands of unfortunate European women were burnt or tortured and drowned in the worst kind of ways by the rest of Christendom, by the rest of the Christian folk in their own villages and towns. People who knew them, not even have been relatives of these poor women. And why? Because they imagined that these women, who were Christian, by the way, as Christian as anybody else in their towns and villages and cities, they were suspected of not having this thing called faith inside of their hearts. So that's the reason why I said and I stated that the Islamic definitions of believer versus its opposite are pragmatic. They don't allow for these kinds of imagined enemies or these kinds of persecutions, where you can persecute a person because, well, they don't have faith. And so the word, when some Muslims translate the word kafir as infidel, they err. Kafir is from the term, has a root in the verb kafara, which means to hide. And in this case, by extension, to hide the mercy of Allah. So a kafir is one who simply denies that Allah has any relevance in his or her life. Anyone who denies Allah or the Creator, however we may call him, whether they deny him altogether, they say that God doesn't exist, the Creator doesn't exist at all, which is of course the ultimate ingratitude, or that God has, or that Allah has no input in their health, their wealth, their intelligence, their life, or their anything else. So that's about that idea, the idea of a disbeliever. So in fact, what we have here is our first example of a very bad virus. And it's one of the simplest ideas because it's
virus. You mean
a mental virus, an ideological virus. And this one is a very simple one and extremely dangerous, though, because it's summarized in just one word: infidel. A Romance language word that has its root in Latin in two parts: the in for non, and fide, faith. Non-faith, or without faith. Without faith. And so now you've created the concept of a person without faith. Now,
just by the language itself.
Yeah, exactly.
Term.
You created a category of people that are without faith to you, because the word here is going to be used by people. So people are going to be walking around saying infidel and trying to put people into that category. Because you have the category. The category exists. It's infidel. Now what are you going to do with it? You're going to have to put some people in there.
You have to fill it up. Because there's
exactly. And this is why Christianity and all these paganisms, especially Christianity, since the term is a Romance language term that also exists in non-Romance language, Christian languages, like Germanic languages, English, for example. Infidel is an English word. It comes from Latin. Why Christianity has always been plagued with this issue. It defines itself by the other. Christianity and Christendom has always needed the infidel, those without faith, to define itself. And Islam has never needed such, because we don't have that category of people without faith. We have people who are ingrates. But ingratitude is something that is observable, because ingratitude is something that is spoken or done. It's not resides in the heart. So you can recognize it's an action.
But doesn't that create another category?
Yes, it does create a category, but it's a category that exists and is observable, as opposed to a category you can never really